Good morning and welcome, everyone. We'll let folks get settled in and we will start momentarily. Thank you all for being here with us today. All right, and thank you again for joining us for our Black History Month panel presentation featuring 2023 Hall of Fame participants of the Museum of African American Addiction Treatment and Recovery. Today's presentation is brought to you by the Great Lakes ATTC and SAMHSA. The Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC are funded by SAMHSA under the following cooperative agreements. The views expressed in this webinar are the views of the speaker and do not reflect the official position of DHHS and SAMHSA. This is just a reminder that the Great Lakes ATTC believe that words matter, or language matters, words have power. The ATTC network uses affirming language to promote the promises of recovery by advancing evidence-based and culturally informed practices. And we do have a few housekeeping items for you. If you are in need of any technical difficulties, me, Alyssa Kuala, or Jen Winslow will be happy to assist you as long as you individually message us, and we will do our best to help you in any way we can. Questions for the panelists, please put any of your questions into the Q&A section of your toolbar. Please do not put any questions in the chat unless you are trying to reach out to the production team, as we will be taking a break at the end of the presentation to answer any of those questions. You will be directed to a very short survey at the end of the presentation, and we would greatly appreciate it if you could fill that out. Certificates of attendance will be sent out via email to all who attended the session in full, and the recording will also be available on the Great Lakes ATTC website by the end of the week. If you would like to stay connected with the Great Lakes ATTC, follow us on Facebook, check out our LinkedIn, YouTube, and our podcast channel. And I'm super excited to introduce our panelists. Today, we have David T. Jones. He's the Chief Behavioral Health Officer for the state of Illinois. We have Dr. Dawn Tyus, Director and Principal Investigator, Southeast Addiction Technology Transfer Center. We have Dora Dantzler-Wright. She's the founder and CEO of Chicago Recovering Communities Coalition. Dr. Jonathan Lofgren, Faculty Addictions Counseling Program at Minneapolis College, and Dr. Deetra Hawkins, Director of Consultation at Yale University, Program for Recovery and Community Health. And I'm very excited and honored to hand this over to Mark Sanders, who is the Illinois State Project Manager for the Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC. Thank you all for being here.
And thank you so much, Alyssa. Thank you, Jen. With everyone joining me and giving Alyssa and Jen and the Great Lakes ATTC a virtual round of applause for hosting our event this morning. How cool are those hands going up like that? Now I'll ask for one more round of applause to our Hall of Fame recipients who are our panelists today. And I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule. We have people from all over. I saw Flint, Michigan, Detroit. I saw someone posted in Minneapolis, there's 15 inches of snow. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. And for that, I offer you a gift in the form of a story followed by a dedication. So I promised the 95-year-old man that I would share this story with every group that I interacted with the first time we had contact. About 4 years ago, I was flying in from Arizona to Chicago, where I live. And on the plane next to me was a man who had earned 6 Purple Hearts. And how do you earn a Purple Heart? I'm glad you asked. Bravery. He was a 95-year-old World War II veteran. In other words, for 3.5 hours on this flight, I'm sitting next to the bravest human being I ever met in my life. And at one point he says, Mark, what do you do? I says, I'm a social worker. I give speeches. I talk to counselors, case managers, recovery coaches, clinical supervisors, executive directors. And he told me to tell you, thank you for your service. Thank you so very much for your service. Know that I know that the world cannot compensate you enough for the work that you do. Thank you so much. My dedication is to my Uncle Isaac. I'm from a family of alcohol use disorder survivors, and both of my grandfathers died of cirrhosis of the liver. My father was in the first generation of Americans to die smoking crack cocaine. And as soon as my dad died, my Uncle Isaac went in front of a judge one more time and prayed for treatment. The judge put him in treatment. And the counselors called his 13 siblings. How many of you have 13 siblings? I don't even think people can make 13 babies anymore. So they called his 13 siblings and said, would you participate in this family therapy? He says, no, we're not. We don't like him. He stole money from us to buy heroin. The counselor called the second time and says, we have food. They said, we'll be there. So all 13 of our aunts and uncles participated. And they invited 26 nieces and nephews. 39 of us participated in my uncle's family therapy for recovery. And he was the first person in our family to get into recovery. And we count over 30 people in our family who are now in recovery. You see, if you're with us today, you're involved in helping people with recovery. Know that yours is the gift that continues to give. Again, thank you for what you do, and let us begin. So I have some questions that I'm going to pose to the panelists, and you can feel free to pose questions as well, because towards the end, we're going to utilize your questions and ask some really tough questions as well, because we want to make sure that we get some really good responses. So let us begin. This first question is directed to all of the panelists. For years, there has been discussion about culturally specific substance use disorder services or treatment for African Americans. What does that mean for you? Culturally specific services for African Americans with substance use disorder.
I'll start. Can you hear me good?
Yes.
So for me, also as the director of the African American Behavioral Health Center of Excellence, for me, when I think about culturally specific substance use disorder treatment for African American, it provides me with a lot of hope. It provides me with the possibility of really shifting the narrative and amplifying all the needs that we've known for many years, specifically tailored toward African Americans. So I'll start with my heart, and I'll put it out there that I'm very hopeful every time this comes up in the conversation, because we all know we're behind time in it, but now there's no greater time to begin providing culturally specific substance use services.
I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
And so for me, it really is about ensuring that African Americans have access to both evidence-based as well as evidence-informed treatment. For example, we know that for people with opioid use disorder, having access to the 3, for example, FDA-approved medications, whether it's methadone, buprenorphine, naltrexone, Vivitrol, along with therapy, and then explicit connections to the social determinants of health, generate certainly much better health outcomes for African Americans. And so that for me, that is really important in terms of making sure that folks can access the most effective treatment.
Thank you. And thank you all for putting on this great webinar, and congratulations to all my colleagues that are on the call with us, both as panelists and guests. It's really an honor to be amongst you. And this question made me think about the notion of seeing loving kindness, speaking loving kindness, and hearing loving kindness. I'll tell you what I mean. Seeing representation of culture within the institution, the facility, the staff, and the curriculum of services delivered to diverse consumer populations. And speaking to consumer populations and people with all the dignity and respect every human being deserves. Speaking with compassion and sensitivity to the unique historic and present traumatic stressors I like to call trauma consciousness, affecting African Americans at every level of society. And hearing the cultural and linguistic syntax within the services delivered to consumer populations. As we heard earlier, the choice of words and language matters to our people. If you serve African Americans, you might check out this book called The Hiptionary by Mahmoud El-Kati. Don't abandon the science when you're working with African Americans, but do apply it in ways that accommodate the cultural characteristics and attributes of African Americans. Don't limit yourselves to the rigidity of recovery pathway descriptions and philosophies. Create space for emerging evidence of the diversity of recovery and many pathways of recovery that present within the African American recovery diaspora.
Well, I love all of this and all the information that was being shared and the connections that have been already made known as we think about hope, access, love, and kindness, and just the knowledge that is already here in our community. So I'm Dr. Deetra Hawkins, and I'm very, very honored to just be here and be part of this conversation. And what is most important to me when I think about culturally specific programming and services is that for me, a story comes up, and I think about my colleagues and my friends who, when I was a postdoc, helped me learn what was really important. And the first thing that I think about is my friend Dorian, who we lost, who is a champion who supported men, and what he would say to people is, help me, help you, help yourself. And those are the stories, the resilience of our community that has always been there is what comes up for me. And so I always want to lean into that. We don't have to think of recovery or treatment in these very isolated ways. I think about housing, I think about job access, I think about entrepreneurship, I think about working with our youth and cross-generational conversations. So more to say, glad that we get to start off this way.
Is Dora with us right now?
No, she hopped off for a little bit, Mark, so.
We shall come back to Dora. Thank you so much. Dr. Lofgren from Minnesota, the birthplace of modern substance use disorders treatment, Minneapolis, Minnesota. You have been involved in a project to define recovery in Black communities and to describe recovery principles in Black communities. As it pertains to the definition, what is unique about recovery in Black communities? And can you share a few of its recovery principles?
Thanks so much, Mark. So I'm not sure if everybody has the definition that I had the privilege of working on with Mark and a couple other people, our Texas colleagues, the Powells from down at APA, and then with a host of people from all across the country in the Black community. But it says that African American recovery is restorative, is holistic, and preventative. It includes physical, social, and spiritual growth. Recovery embraces values and traditions of African American culture, and is communal and interconnected with our people. Recovery involves participating in family, neighborhood, and individualized healing that contributes to sustained health and wellness. And I apologize for not introducing myself. I know I've been introduced, but my name's Jonathan Lofgren, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. What that means to me is I haven't used any substances for the purposes of getting intoxicated since Labor Day, 1987. And I chose an abstinence pathway, thank goodness for me, because that's what has brought me to this point, to be sitting amongst my wonderful colleagues. African American recovery is unique in that it relies on a number of cultural factors easily overlooked by the larger service delivery structures. One is that there's an acknowledgement and acceptance of the deeply ingrained racist sociocultural phenomena relentlessly impacting our nation and our peoples. And when I say acceptance, I don't mean that it's accepted like bring it on, we want some more. What I mean is there's so much denial pervasive in our society that it has a deep, profound impact on the psychology of African Americans. Like most other systems within our country, you need look no further than the end of the line to see when resources reach African Americans. Thus, there's a unique opportunity and a reality that African Americans so often have to make do and figure things out for ourselves. The playbook comes from the history of our ancestors that have written, and from the complexity that balances today's African Americans together across and between and through the diversity of generations. This legacy is not embraced with any futility. To the contrary, it is deeply embedded in our genetics. In the miseducation of the Negro, Carter G. Woodson said, "Those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished will lose the inspiration which comes from the teaching and the learning of their biography and their history." I know my time is short, but I have a couple of the principles that we wrote along with that definition of African American recovery that seem fitting for today's occasion. One, we heard somebody already mentioned the notion of hope. Hope comes from within that history, but it also comes from the hope of recovery. It is found and it is expressed and it is lived through the multiple pathways of recovery that African Americans will make. And cultural expression, so deeply embedded in the culture and traditions of African Americans that you can't get away from it in any sense in our great nation and around the world. Whether you see hip hop culture, community culture, spiritual and religious culture, it is pervasive and maybe not credited quite enough for how it has shaped America. Recovery also has a principle of social, economic, political, and cultural justice. So many people that find the pathway to recovery include that fight for justice for Black people as a healing entity within their spirits, within their communities, and within the greater society. Joy springs eternal in recovery, and it's another principle so befitting for the freedom that recovery brings to people. Spirituality, family, neighborhood, and community-driven activities, participation and engagement are also phenomena that emerge as critical to recovery pathways for African Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lofgren. I always like to pay attention to who traveled the farthest to attend the training. And we have with us today, I hope I pronounced her name correct, Genevieve from Ghana, West Africa. Here's what I'd like to take a moment to share. As a part of a recovery journey, me and 7 African Americans took a journey to Ghana, West Africa, and we met with the elders between 60 to 90 years old. And one of my colleagues asked the elders, how do you feel about us as African Americans? We were not prepared for their response. They said, we love you, we think about you, and we pray for you more than you'll ever know. And we cried like babies. They never forgot us. And we were there to learn African American culture as a part of recovery, to bring it back to the African American community. As Jonathan mentioned, it's more than the individual. That recovery is about the community as a whole. Your community benefits from your recovery. Thank you so much. Dr. Hawkins from Yale. Dr. Hawkins has these dinners where people eat together and break bread to create an environment of comfort where they can have open discussions around race. But Dr. Hawkins, here's the question. You are a specialist, one of the nation's best, in helping organizations with diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. As it pertains to serving African Americans with substance use disorders, what work is needed to be done on the organizational level?
Thank you for the setup on that, and all the work that I've had an opportunity and really the honor to do, and just creating those spaces. And I had written all these notes about like what we needed to do on an organizational level, but what it really comes down to for an organization and the work is that we have to stop and actually listen, ask, be curious about what our communities need. That it doesn't matter if we come in with strategies and ideas and what's going to really make a difference until we have made sure that our communities that are experiencing trauma, live with trauma, have persistent experiences with trauma, especially around, daily microaggressions, micro insults, and what I often would say are macro, not micro. And understanding that there's so much more to a person's life than just what's happening internally, right? Like we also have to understand the context that we live in. So one of my first things with working with organizations is to say that we have to really get clear for ourselves on what we care about and what our own stories are, so that we can sit and listen to someone else's story, and that we don't need to fix what that other person is telling us if we think it's not quite right. That when we get to a place where we can stop fixing, then people can feel heard, right? And begin to heal. So a focus for me and my dinners and the work is really around healing. And the experience that I've seen in our culture is that we have this, very big medical model, kind of dominant culture perspective that is very invested in the diagnoses and not necessarily the journey, and not what it takes to actually heal. And so for an organization, we need to treat it just like a person, and just like a family, and look at all of these different dimensions. And I hope that what we start off with is listening and believing people first.
And thank you so much. Director Jones, originally from Chicago, then Philadelphia. Philadelphia played a major role in revolutionizing substance use disorders treatment. They called it a recovery revolution in Philadelphia. And then you brought that knowledge to Illinois. So thank you so very much. We benefit from you being here as our Chief Behavioral Health Officer. How do you help assure in your role as Chief Behavioral Health Officer that the unique treatment needs of each community is addressed, including Black communities?
Mark, thank you so much for that really thoughtful question. And I am also just so honored to be on this panel, to be included with these very esteemed inductees. As Dr. Hawkins was just speaking, I have to tell you, I want to figure out how to get invited to be a participant at that dinner table, because I love the healing that I know is occurring. I also, and Mark, you, as you mentioned, Philadelphia, I also want to acknowledge a couple of past Hall of Fame inductees from Philadelphia who are just legendary, both Arthur Evans and Roland Lamb. Talk about servant leaders, just beautiful spiritual human beings. And I was blessed to spend time and share space with them. And they certainly, I think, help inform the work that we're moving forward in Illinois. We very much take a population health approach, and a population health approach, recognizing that there are numerous pathways, and to as Dr. Lofgren mentioned, numerous pathways to achieve long-term sustained recovery. We think that is absolutely important. In fact, when you looked at some of the data that came out of Mental Health America, they indicate that overall mental health, and implied in terms of substance use disorder as well, the conditions, those both occur in Black and African American people at about the same rate, or actually less frequency than white America, right? But as we think about, in terms of, to your question, Mark, around like thinking about communities and community specific, what tends to differentiate for African Americans is, again, what my colleagues have alluded to, is the institutional racism that we experience, as Dr. Hawkins just mentioned, both at the micro and macro level, and within certain communities, within the African American. And we know that we are a very diverse community, that it's not homogenous. We are not in any way. That folks have been exposed to primary and secondary violence. And so part of what we are really pushing out is more and more making sure that trauma-informed approaches are being instituted in every place possible, so that as an African American, when you encounter, and candidly, whether that be kind of through traditional treatment, or again, as was mentioned, any of the elements in terms of accessing those social determinants of health around housing or employment and that kind of thing, that people are asking, how I can help you, maybe what happened to you, as opposed to what's wrong with you. And so more and more, we feel like that if we are, really encouraging trauma-informed environments, really across our great state, that obviously that will yield better health outcomes for all communities, but in particular, African American communities. The other piece too, and again, it was alluded to, is that we, it's as people are having these encounters, it's about much more than their, if you will, their treatment process. And so as a result of it being more than their treatment process, and again, I think it was Dr. Hawkins who mentioned, we know that, people are across this chronic disease. And that's the other piece, is that we recognize the chronicity of the disease. And because of that people change, that things fluctuate. And so the impact of that could be at times that a person who was having, had long-term employment starts to experience underemployment, or not employed at all. As a result, there's a consequence in terms of potentially on their housing, and they may experience housing insecurity or homelessness. We recognize that all of those domains are possible. And so again, that, when we think about, how we're moving the system forward in a way that looks at the whole person and all the dynamics that the wonderful African-American community has experienced, that we're taking that all into account. And I'll leave it there, Mark.
And thank you so much. And Dora Dantzler Wright. Dora goes into spaces. Dora goes into spaces that lots of people who sit behind desks may not be comfortable going into. They visit in Chicago what's called Tent City. These individuals who are homeless, living with homelessness, and some of them have substance use disorders, they do outreach. You should know, those of you from Minneapolis should know that when George Floyd was killed, it impacted the entire country. And there was some looting on the West Side, a little rioting in Chicago, and Dora and recovery coaches went out to make a difference in that space. She hosts Recovery Olympics, all things recovery. Historian William White estimated that about 30 years ago, 70% of the counselors working in our profession were in recovery, and 30% were not. And gradually those numbers shifted, where 70% of counselors doing this were not in recovery and 30% were. And he is predicting, William White, that we will start to see more of a balance between recovery and non-recovery status through the role of recovery coach. Dora, can you comment on any unique roles of recovery coaches in African-American communities?
Yes, recovery coaches employ a skill set that can meet people where they are, as you talked about in the tent cities. We go out into the community and we meet people in a host of different areas to be able to take recovery to them. Oftentimes, they may not be able to access services in their community or know where they are. So meeting them in the community, whether it's the tent cities, whether it's at a coffee shop, or whether it's at their neighboring restaurant, to say recovery is possible, and we want to be able to let you know that recovery is wherever you are, and we want to be able to put a face on recovery for them.
So in so many states, and I invite everybody to think about your state as I share this, the incarcerated are disproportionately from communities of color, and often prisons are not in those communities. So sometimes people are incarcerated hundreds of miles away from Black communities. Some communities don't even have residential treatment. So, Dora, how do you see the role of a recovery coach so that people will not slip through the cracks when they're coming back from incarceration or residential treatment? When should recovery coaches start to build rapport?
The minute they are released. We want to have recovery coaches meet them, because when they go back into their communities, oftentimes there's a big disconnect as to, I've been gone for 1, 3, 5, 10 years, and things have really, really changed. And a recovery coach would be able to bridge the gap with connecting them to those services in their community, help them to identify, this is recovery, it's where you are. You can start here. You may not be able to get formal treatment, but let's start right here. I can help you, I can case manage you, I can direct you to where you can go get those services to begin the recovery process, and meeting them where they are.
And thank you so much. And Dr. Tyus, Director of the African American Behavioral Health Center of Excellence, thank you for joining us. And for years, you've done work with the faith community. So your question is, what is the role of the faith community in recovery in Black communities?
And thank you, Mark, as well as all of my colleagues have stated. It's truly a pleasure to be amongst this esteemed group. So thank you for having all of us, as well as hosting this panel today. And as you indicated, in the Southeast ATTC, this is something that we have done for years. We found in the South that oftentimes the African-American community really look upon the church as a solace of healing, and I'm sure across the country, but I'm from the South, from the dirty South, and we definitely really lean in on our faith communities, because in the faith communities, we know for African-Americans, there's strength, there's power, there's hope, there's truth, there's resilience. There's so many things within our faith communities that a lot of African Americans really align with and they connect with. So when I first started at the Southeast ATTC, they used to host a faith conference every year. And so I was really young, as I've been directly and indirectly mentored by yourself, as well as Dietrich Hawkins from afar. I really just went in and I saw that they were attending this conference and they were just taking the information back, but there was no action, that there was really no real intentional work being done out of our HETC with these faith leaders. And that they really, in my mind, they could really be catalysts for change, because what they exemplify is a lot of what we see and that what we demonstrate as African Americans. And these are a lot of the skills and a lot of the support that people in recovery really need. So why not tap into the faith communities? So I decided a while right after the conference, I said, well, let's just take a break. Let's kind of restructure and let's talk to the faith communities. Let's talk to clergy. What is it that you really need to be able to really be that source of support? And so in hosting these roundtable discussions, these listening sessions, we really found that they needed the knowledge and that they needed to understand what really is addiction. So we started a learning community, and the learning community, we walked them through the neurobiology, the biology of addiction, not taking away the spiritual context, but really understanding the science behind the addiction. So we hosted these learning communities, and then we would all come back together for the big conference. But we found that it was most impactful when we really worked with a cohort of faith leaders so that they could go back and they could be the champions. But we taught it in such a way that their communities, that they could take the information back into their communities and teach others, as well as set up some level of peer-to-peer mentoring programs within their churches. We're excited because my thought process is I was raised in the church, and spirituality is truly important, but they're also about the power of connections in the church. We have usher boys, we have choirs. And so my mind was, well, why can't we have peer support in the church? Why can't we have people who in long-term recovery connecting and being that access point and that bridge to getting people into treatment? So we've been working with a lot of faith communities to help them really to develop those peer programs. And so it's really been exciting. And I like to come from the perspective of, on every, almost on every community, you're going to have some level of a Black church. So there are different resources that each church has. So why not come together? You may host Bible study while someone else is hosting a recovery meeting. Let's rally our resources. And that is our message, is that you don't have to have, we always sometimes want to go to the financial side, and you have some mega churches who may be able to support some programs, but you also have the food pantry who can provide food, those that can have clothing. All of that is support within our community for people who are suffering with recovery. So we start out a lot with language. And with language, we provide them with language, some scripts that they can even talk about substance use and recovery from the pulpit, helping them integrate that into their sermons. I have a young guy who's working for me now. He's been with me for quite some time. He's out of Morehouse College. He just graduated from Emory School of Theology, and he's a pastor, and he works very well. But the difference is that he is an innovator. He isn't a millennial. He is helping to change and shape the thought process of a lot of senior pastors when it comes to really looking at recovery as a whole. So to answer the question, what is their role? I think that they definitely can, they are, and they can continue to be champions in the communities of recovery. They can be support. They can utilize all of the skills, the knowledge, the level of love and hope that they have for healing. So we like to say there's happiness, healing, and hope within our faith communities. And I'll leave it right there.
And thank you so much. Let me ask the participants. If you were not alive in 1986, would you put a thumbs up? This is our informal way of knowing how many of you weren't with us in 1986. Let's see how many thumbs go up. There's a lot of thumbs going. A lot of people were not born in 1986 yet, but they've caught up. They're with us. 86 was the year that crack cocaine replaced marijuana as the #1 street drug. And we went from treating people as if they had a disease to criminalizing it. And insurance stopped covering addiction at the same rate once crack cocaine was around and stigma increased. So every denomination of Black church formed its own faith-based drug ministry. And so, Dr. Tyus, there are people with us today who are wondering, well, then how do we, and where we're doing work in our treatment center, how do we partner with faith communities? And Michael Askew put in chat, one of our Hall of Fame recipients last year, some churches need education around substance use disorder. And I wanted to point out that you also said, how come churches can't be places where recovery support can happen? So how can a treatment center partner with the faith community?
So one of the things that we do, a part of our curriculum, is the empowering faith communities to make sure that they're having a level of engagement. And so, like I just indicated, there are churches on every corner almost, and I'm just really looking at the analogy from the South, but there are churches all over. And to make sure that we have in our peer model, we have peer supports who are working inside of the church. Those are people who we know are in long-term recovery. The access point is getting them connected to treatment providers who are in the community. So setting up and inviting treatment providers to come and sit at the table to talk about what services do they have, what does those services require, creating this level of a collaborative relationships within the whole community, that's healing. And so being able to make sure that that engagement piece is bi-directional, and not just for faith communities, but also for treatment providers to be linking with their churches within that community, because we know that there are a shortage of clinicians, but there's always people inside of churches who are willing to help and who can help. And it's just the level of being able to engage and having the if you're thinking like one of Dr. Hawkins, when you have the equity dinners, who are at the table? When you think about church functions, invite some of those treatment providers from the community, and that set up a level of linkage and collaboration.
And thank you so much. And Director Jones, I remember when we first started talking in a big way about harm reduction. And across the country, I hear, what? They're trying to make it so everybody can like legalize drugs and they're going to take away our jobs. And now there's lots of people working in our field who really embrace the concept of harm reduction. Can you speak of what do you see of the role of harm reduction in Black communities?
Thank you again, Mark, for again, very thoughtful question. Harm reduction is huge. I mean, we know fundamentally harm reduction is about meeting people where they're at, and I think that as we think about harm reduction, we think about it from a perspective of, and I have to continue to, acknowledge, what's happening within the African American community in particular. So, Mark, bear with me, if you will, why just a couple of data points, right? So, here back in Illinois in 2018, the data showed that opioid overdose deaths among non-Hispanic whites residents in Illinois decreased by about 6.5%. During that same period, deaths among non-Hispanic Blacks, so that is African American and Blacks, increased by just over 9%, right? The other thing that's happening is as we look across, and you had mentioned, Mark, some of the time that I had spent in Philadelphia. So this is true both of Philadelphia and Chicago. And that is that we saw, and this is again, both kind of 2 years ago, we saw that African Americans died more from overdose deaths than by gun violence, right? And so the reality is we don't want to see any wonderful life lost, whether it be overdose deaths or gun violence. But the reality that, in fact, overdoses were killing more African American people than gun violence was startling in and of itself. And so part of what we certainly wanted to do was to move forward on, as you think about harm reduction, making sure that some of those standard kind of harm reduction approaches were made available. So, for example, we talk about naloxone. You guys know that that's the medication that reverses overdose deaths potentially, or overdoses, I'm sorry. And so making sure that naloxone was readily available throughout, for example, here in Illinois, and at no cost, because part of the challenge is that for sometimes within the African American community, the economic burden of having a tool, if you will, or medication available to provide the support because of the cost, that is such a significant hurdle. So, we move forward with programs like Access Narcan, again, that then gets that naloxone out to any provider, any family for the most part that wants to have it. The other thing that we did, and this is both what Ms. Dora and Dr. Tias mentioned around just in part of just like, how you partnered with people with lived experience and lived expertise, right? To then be able to say, I understand the challenges that you have that you are experiencing. We want to be able to walk with you to help you get connected to whatever those supports look like. And so partnering with people with lived experience in ways that, so from my perspective, because I think part of my role is to look at it also and address it from a payer perspective. That is, how are we supporting recovery community organizations? How are we supporting those kind of various harm reduction strategies in a way that they're able to scale up more? And so that has been work that we've done. The other piece is that, we have looked abroad. As you all are aware, part of the harm reduction strategies that have been rolled out are utilizing places like overdose prevention sites, or whether they call supervised consumption sites, that up until about a year and a half ago, didn't exist in the United States. But we know On Point, for example, has opened an overdose prevention site in New York, and that strategy has helped to save, candidly, even at this early point, hundreds of African Americans' lives, because again, they have reached out, met people where they are, brought them in, said, we understand the challenges that you're going in. Here are the supports that you need. This is not without judgment. Again, taking very much a trauma-informed approach. And so, we think that, that harm reduction piece is critical. And then, and hopefully at some point, Mark, if not now, at a later point in time, I'd also like to talk about even, kind of the mobile treatment and how that piece being connected to harm reduction makes even more of a difference. But I will pause there for now.
Yes, and we'll get right to that. But let me ask you this. So visualize a big meeting in a Black community, and we're talking about harm reduction. And one aspect of harm reduction we talk about is methadone maintenance, reducing the spread of HIV, hepatitis C, and drug overdose deaths. And as we know, methadone maintenance clinics have been in the Black community since the maybe 60s, but definitely in the 1970s, following the Vietnam War. And invariably, someone says, it's a form of genocide in the Black community. It doesn't work. I remember people using methadone and heroin at the same time. There was so much dishonesty that people would come in with urine drops, and they would bring their grandmother's urine instead of their own. It doesn't work. What do we do with that?
Mark, it's a great question. And part of what I think, we have to continue to do is inform in a way that the information says, if you think about somebody who is suffering from a disease of addiction, again, it's a chronic disease. And and I always, harken back to say, so I have a cousin who has diabetes. They have had diabetes for easily 35, 40 years. They continue to be on insulin. And as they take that insulin, they then are able to have a much higher quality of life than if they weren't. I think sometimes the stigma of the disease itself is such a challenge that it prevents people from recognizing that whether, if somebody is on methadone and they in fact are able are functioning and advancing in terms of having kind of a quality of life, meeting kind of their activities of daily living, not much different than if somebody is taking medication for heart disease, not much different if somebody's taking medication for diabetes, not much different if somebody is taking medication as it comes up for asthma. So I think it's that reference that we like to direct beautiful African American communities to make sure they have all of the information. And again, it's an opportunity to partner with people with lived experience who can say, that this has been my experience, and as a result of that medication, along with the treatment and the other supports, I am here now by the grace of God and by His glory, and living and surviving, and for that matter, exceeding. So that's how I would respond to that, Mark.
Okay, and in a second, I'm going to ask you about mobile recovery, but Dora Dancer, right? We talk of multiple pathways of recovery. What are your thoughts about people whose pathway of recovery is medication-assisted recovery? Do you think those personal stories help reduce stigma?
Yes, Mark, I think they help reduce stigma because I really believe that without continued education about the risk of certain medications and the different pathways of recovery, there's always the risk of abuse. So we need to continue to educate the Black community, and that is a lot of what we do. As you know, prescribed methadone maintenance was probably the only form back when I came into recovery, and it was in a totally abstinence-based model. So the education thereof, I had to educate myself. I had to educate my family. And it's an ongoing issue that we need to continue to educate about these medications and how they help. And we will increase the numbers and decrease a lot of the stigma around it.
Director Jones, for years, all treatment took place in buildings behind walls. Can you comment on mobile recovery in Black communities?
Absolutely, Mark. So we think that the opportunity for expanding mobile treatment, one, it's part of how we can actually even help mitigate stigma. So to the point you just made, part of the challenge at times was you had to go to these four walls, whether it was intensive outpatient or a community mental health clinic, whatever. The idea that you had to go to that place to participate in treatment for African Americans who were already carrying, in a number of cases, such a heavy burden, that was yet just another burden in and of itself. And so the idea of saying, we are going to bring care and treatment to you as opposed to you having to come to it, is, we think, game changing. I think additionally, the other piece is, and we've talked about this, is that, life is certainly way more complex. And so for some African American families, the economic burden of, candidly, the cost of transportation, the cost of having to figure out who's going to take care of my children while I'm going, taking, X number of trains or buses or whatever else to get to treatment. All of that, in a number of cases, is removed as a result of having mobile treatment. The other piece is that what we also are finding more and more is that mobile treatment creates even greater capacity for integrated care. So again, we know that people, as I mentioned previously, are coming forward, and sometimes it's around the wound care from injecting. Sometimes it's actually a result of having diabetes, hypertension, other physical health challenges. Some mobile treatment vans have the capacity to address the physical health challenges, the mental health challenges, and the addictions, all in a way that is, again, results in much better coordinated care. And we think that having, again, expanding mobile treatment will create a whole new standard of care. And so we are committed to it. Mark, and we think that, again, that being mobile treatment being a part of you know, a large continuum of the service array is essential.
And thank you so much. And panelists, don't we wish we could see the faces of the participants? Wouldn't that be something? And we can't see your faces, right? We recognize some of the names. Rick Nance is with us. Cherie is with us. So we want to just find out from you, those of you who are attending, use a symbol. How's this going so far? Your symbol can be our feedback. Looks like folks is going okay so far. We look forward to dialoguing with you really, really soon, because we see that some of your questions are super fantastic. So we look forward to that dialogue. Rick Nance says, good conversation. Dr. Lofgren, you're involved in the Center for African American Recovery Development. What is the focus of this organization, and what is the reason this work is needed in Black community?
Thank you. It's been just a great dialogue, and the questions and answers and discussions have been amazing. I would just like to say to the last question that was being discussed, talking about bringing services to the community. And I think we also have to figure out ways to make sure that the community knows it's for them. Our community hasn't always been treated very well by the healthcare system. And we went through a period where our Black communities built supports and resources through the churches and community-based healthcare clinics that people saw as theirs. And I think there's still a bit of a disconnect. There's an opportunity to strengthen this notion that the types of services we talk about and the types of service providers that are essential to contributing to bringing services into the Black community have to have some reflection, some notion that they and the services they're bringing, that we propose to bring, are for them and belong to them. And whenever we have that disconnection, I think the issues of trust and the history that's woven into, right into our genetics, come up and maybe cause us to also avoid accessing, because there's a belief that it's not for us. And so it brings me to this question that you're saying, Mark, that you asked about the Center for African American Recovery Development. About 2014, 2015, I wrote a short paper. I was working with a few people from Illinois and a handful of people from around Illinois and a handful of people from around the country. And we were sort of conceptualizing this notion of creating an organization that would bring recovery support into Black communities, because there was this movement afoot of sort of changing the dynamic of treating people and sending them to self-help, like wishing them luck after we treated them, and give them an AA meeting and a church and say, good luck to you, of bringing a different type of recovery support to people. And there was a gap, a big disparity gap in, like so many other innovations that often take far too long to reach our people. This gap in reaching African Americans, bringing recovery support to African Americans, there was a gap. And so we started talking about this, almost a decade ago, bringing recovery support to Black communities. So this brand new organization called CARD, thecard.org with 2 A's, CAARD.org, thecard.org, it seeks to bring recovery support to every African American that wants it. I mean, that's our vision. We want recovery support to be available to every African American that wants it and maybe needs it, because we're trying to figure out how to nurture the notion of want. But we definitely have this mission to bring recovery support to every African American that wants it. And some of the things that we've done so far in our short time of existence is to strengthen relationships and collaborate with institutions like Dr. Tyus's place at Morehouse in the Center for African American Behavioral Health Excellence, and favor Faces and Voices of Recovery and Black Faces and Black Voices, and Harvard and University of Minnesota, and wherever we can find those collaborations to figure out ways to bring recovery support. And we focused our first year on high density African American population areas, urban and rural, and inviting members of a couple of communities, again, we're brand new, to come together and talk about things like needs and wants in terms of how to bring recovery support into those communities. And then with maybe not an ultimate goal, but a big goal to create recovery community organizations that are accessible to Black communities, that are in Black communities, that are hosted by Black people, so that people could find recovery support, as was mentioned, by people that look like them, that know about their history, that are connected to their current cultural environments. And we see where there's centers of excellence around the country in delivering community recovery support within high African American population areas, thriving and doing exceedingly important work and meaningful work, where members of those communities see that recovery organization as theirs. And I feel like that's so critical. And that's what CARD wants to do. We want to bring community recovery organizations and supports into all different types of community areas, so that people could see recovery community organizations in their own communities as their own. So that's what CARD's all about. And you know, I mentioned earlier, as with so many types of organizations that provide community work, we're having to figure out how to make it go, because it's not easy in this big environment. And we're so grateful for the connections and collaborations that we do have. But we see this, and the people that form this organization, Mark, would be like Miss Danza Wright, and Dr. D and Dr. Tyus and folks from the community, whether they're within CARD or not, are the experts at bringing recovery community organizations to the people. And that's something that we're really proud of. We have a legacy of people on that board that would be unmatched in terms of their competence and abilities. This is the nation's leading team of people with this type of expertise that you might not see really anywhere else. So I'm humbled and proud and grateful to be a founding member of that organization, CARD, and we hope to find ways to continue to do the work that we've started, because we're just scratching the surface. But we know that the need We did a very comprehensive study. We know that the need is out there around the country. And so we're going to try to coordinate with these other institutions to provide that type of technical support, community support, and cultural support to make culturally congruent community recovery support available to our people that need it and want it.
Thank you so much. And in these next questions, we're going to do these quicker because we want to make sure that we have time to get to the participant questions. I know they're going to be exciting and interesting. So Dr. Tyus, you're the director of African American Behavioral Center for Excellence. How does the organization help, how can the organization help individuals and organizations effectively serve African Americans with substance use disorder?
And I'll say this really, really quick. I just want to put this out here. This is the first African American Center of Excellence. So excited that SAPSA recognized the need for this center to focus specifically on African Americans. And I'm even more elated that Morehouse School of Medicine has the grant. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm excited about that. But the way that we can help you to make sure that you're effectively working and serving African Americans is really by continuing our task of making sure that we're putting out really good, worthwhile, and needed trainings. We can also, you can put in a technical assistant request from us, which means that on our website, and I did drop that in the chat and it may be gone, but you can go on our website, you can put a request in, whether it be a training, whether we need to connect you with our subject matter expert. And as Dr. Lofgren indicated, we work with a lot of subject matter experts. We have access to Dr. Hawkins, we have access to CARD. We've worked really well with them. We're always looking to build up our subject matter expert, because one of the things that I'm very passionate about at the center is definitely doing a lot of things for Black people by Black people. And really, there's a lot of expertise and a lot of knowledge in this area that we need to be amplifying those voices. So just connect with us. Go to our website. We have a plethora of resources. Again, if you can email me, our team can help lead you and guide you in the right direction. So Mark said quick. So that's my quick and down and dirty way. Just really looking out for our training opportunities and really putting in those technical assistance requests. And we are a center of excellence, which means that we can service this entire country and not just specifically a region.
And thank you so much. And Don Coy is Native American from Wisconsin, got into recovery. He felt a little pessimism because most of his tribe was still drinking and getting high, and suicide was high. So he met with the elders and he asked the elders, what will be the sign that Native American people are ready to recover in masses? And the elders told Don Coy that the sign that our people are ready to recover is that a white buffalo will be born somewhere in the United States. Now, you know, most buffalo are like brown. And in Janesville, Wisconsin, a white buffalo was born. So they started a program called whitebison.org that's helping Native American communities achieve group recovery. And Don Coy has coined the phrase, creating a healing forest to promote recovery. That is to mobilize the entire community to work together to promote recovery. And William White calls that treatment without walls. Dora, can you describe the work of on the west side of Chicago and the South Side Opioid Task Force and creating a healing forest?
Thank you, Mark. One of the things that we do on the west side and the south side is we make Narcan available by being on boots on the ground. I've worked extensively with the West Side Opioid Task Force and being in the community level with grassroots organizations and community block clubs, educating, training them on overdose reversal and having naloxone available in those communities and on the blocks where addiction is prevalent. And we also want them to be able to save lives. This work is really, really important in the community because you have to understand a lot of people don't know where the services are. So meeting them where they are in their communities, educating them there, providing recovery support services. Some may not be able to get to treatment. And as a person in long-term recovery, I was not able to get treatment. I had to go to my community. I had to search out services for myself and my family, my children. I couldn't divorce them. And it was real, real important that we all begin to recover together. not in separate silos. You go here, I go there. We have to recover together. And that's what community is all about. Making sure that even though addiction is prevalent in the communities, we want to be a voice and a face for recovery. Recovery is possible. Naloxone is available. We're in a community on the west side in the Austin area where it has one of the highest overdose rates. But if you ask what naloxone is, a lot of people look at you like, are you selling drugs? We are, but we're selling the drug that prevents overdose and having it available for everyone, whether it's on the street corner or in the grocery store, putting those signs up, we have Narcan, and training them how to use it. So it's real, real important in the communities.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much. And Dr. Hawkins, our profession often speaks of cultural competence. Is it possible to become culturally competent in serving African Americans with substance use disorders? And if yes, how do you achieve that? How do you arrive at cultural competence? And if not, what's a realistic goal?
So I'm going to try to make this fast, but also put some other resources out there. So I want to acknowledge CARD and the work that's there, Dr. Tyus, and the opportunity to get support through her program. We have Black Faces, Black Voices. I'm available in many different ways. What I think we do not do enough of is connect to the many resources that are available in our culture and our world. So there's something called the class standards, for example, and there's a wonderful training that's actually online with Think Cultural Health that helps us understand that when we talk about cultural and linguistic competence, we are talking about every point of contact. That means our educators, our education systems need to be brought into this. That means our businesses, our labor departments. When we think about African American recovery, we need to be thinking about it in this very holistic way that is beyond just what clinicians do. I did put an article in the chat because there is a question around, can white people or people who are not Black also be culturally competent? And what I want people to understand is that we are talking about lifting up the aspiration of cultural competence, that we practice cultural humility in that process, and that we need all of us, shopkeepers, the people who are giving out money, when we think about educating banks and those sorts of things, instead of us changing only, we also need those policies and the groups, the communities to also change. So our community in and of itself can start to embody hope, joy, know our wisdom, have that 7th generation, mindset if we want to understand our legacy and connection with First Nation communities as well. So I really think it's important that we understand that it is not a either or, that we don't go and look at things from this perspective of what is missing. My favorite 3 questions for all communities is to first start off asking what is working. And the truth of that is that sometimes what's working is not working for everybody, but we still need to know what is working. We need to be able to talk about what could be better, which is our challenges question. And then we need to talk about what gives us hope. And if we use those as our foundational questions, just to get started, it will actually lead us in the direction that we need to go.
Thank you so much. And this question is for any of our panelists to respond, right? There are people with us today who are wondering, how do you effectively establish the cross-cultural counseling relationship with African Americans with substance use disorders? Someone thinking like, I'm not from the African American culture. How do I make connections with the clients I'm serving cross-culturally?
If I can jump in to start with, I do want to encourage you. You brought up the dinners that I've offered in the work that we've done. So I want to just say that one of the things that we don't do enough of is to go out, like go to movies that feature Black people, work on your own cultural intelligence. If we're trying to do cross-cultural pieces, there's lots of ways that we have to find a way to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's true across for all of us. there's a lot of internalized issues that we also have to deal with. You know, if we're not paying attention to what's going on with the Crown Act, for example, we have so many other things that we can get involved in, and there's real resources for that that are not limited. So just start there. I love talking to people about just have dinner, invite one person. Think about who do you actually come to your home for dinner. Yeah, I know COVID has, changed a lot of that. But if we think about it, we need to expand those relationships with others and actually tell our stories and understand that someone sharing their story is actually an experience of being vulnerable, and we need to honor whatever their story is, even if it's contradictory to ours.
So if there's mistrust across cultures outside of the counseling relationship, there can also be mistrust within. So again, the question is, what are your recommendations for people with us today in building the cross-cultural counseling relationship with African Americans?
I'll jump. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Law.
I feel like Dr. Hawkins really said it all. And I like the proverb, when spider webs unite, they could tie up a lion. We have to collaborate. People have to collaborate. When you're talking cross-cultural, the intelligence of the culture that you're considering working with or working with, knowing a little bit about that culture is absolutely critical. COVID took a toll on our society and on how folks have been building relationships over the last few years. Some of this technology has brought us together, and some of this technology has really separated folks from being together and figuring out how to be together. Being together is something that's really important in the African American tradition. Building those strong relationships, I think, can generate a lot of opportunity. Knowing how to apply good counseling techniques is so helpful. And then using those techniques, like I said earlier, in a culturally sensitive way. The theories I really like to think about are person-centered and motivational and feminist and science-informed clinical and medical approaches. So helpful to African American people, but do it all from a place of loving kindness. Do it all from a place of loving kindness. If that's missing, you know how easy it is for people to see. And I always like the words of Nikki Giovanni. When you be able to bring Black people together to at least provide some of these services, because it still can be very cross-cultural, but the notion that Black love is Black wealth.
So let me ask thank you very much, Dr. Loftman. Let me ask the participants that are with us today, have you ever said the wrong thing? Would you raise your hand if you've ever said the wrong thing before? Yeah, so I so agree with what Dr. Loftman has said. When we say the wrong thing, we're talking about cross-cultural situations. The first thing people want to know is, where's your heart?
Mhm.
If they sense that our heart is coming from a caring place, a loving place, it's amazing what can be forgiven. So, Alyssa, Jen, what are the questions we have from those who've been patient with us today?
Yeah, so we have a couple questions in the Q&A. One of the questions came right after we just started. So they're asking, can the panel share how we destigmatize SUD broadly and MAT in particular in Black communities? 3 of Michigan's most diverse mid-sized cities have low penetration rates in their Black communities. We work to address access barriers on the provider side, but also acknowledge the well-founded mistrust of the medical system, MAT, and methadone in particular. We hear that the 12-step abstinence-only paradigm is dominant rather than acceptance of multiple pathways to recovery, and that even when MAT is available, some folks need it, are discouraged from engaging in MAT.
That's a very fact-filled question, but a lot of what I think about immediately is education, education, education. Is doing a lot of what Ms. Dora is doing, getting out, and it is our job and our duties to educate our communities, to provide them with resources, to create an atmosphere and an environment of learning for them. And but also in doing so, put it on a level in which they understand, understanding that a lot of, they don't understand a lot around evidence-based practices, but even implementing some promising practices. But I will continue to say, educate, 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 each one teach one.
And I completely agree with Dr. Tyus. I think that leading with credible messengers is just such a critical piece. And again, you know, that's certainly what I think Dora and her team do so amazingly well. I also think that just you know, the information around again those people who have, for example, made decisions to participate in buprenorphine, that are comfortable speaking about, you know, kind of the effectiveness and what works. Again, staying with the idea of credible messengers, and then I think it underscores the other points of which, you know, so if we're leading with an open heart and love, that, you know, that makes all the difference.
I wanted to just make a note too, that I think we as a culture can reimagine how we embrace each other and tell our stories. I recently went to see the movie on Whitney Houston, and I think that we have an opportunity to reclaim these stories and really reshape what could have been possible if our communities were thinking about love and kindness, as it's been brought up. You know, how could we have and continue with all of our celebrities, so that there is this opportunity for being well, and that there's just more that we can do if we stretch in a different direction. So we need to also imagine a different way of approaching. And one of the things that I'm very committed to is helping us not get to a place where our first reaction is to just be mad at each other, that we need to do what we need to do to be well. So, some of the work like the NAP ministry, for example, I think we all need to be embracing. But I would love to see us really reclaim some of our narratives. Even thinking of Billie Holiday, right, is a great way to begin understanding that there's other factors in place and that we've contributed in many ways to the harm. And so our community has to, make amends to that, and then also start to do some attunement in the right direction.
Thank you so much to you all who provided some answers to that question. We do have a couple more questions that came through in the Q&A. So for anyone still on the webinar, just so you know, if we don't get through all the questions, I will send the questions to the panelists and we will get them answered and posted on our website. So Dr. Lofgren, how can one receive the African American recovery principles?
They're posted on the CARD website. There's a link, and we'll make those available through the webinar host as well with our notes, the definition and principles. We want them to be accessible to everyone. So we'll make sure that they're attached some kind of way. I don't have access to how to do that, but we'll definitely get those out. And then if you need to contact me, feel free to contact me directly or our host, Mark Sanders. But we'll definitely make those available.
Thank you. Another question was, I appreciate the question about the role of the church. Can anyone address the parallel work needed with mosques and imams? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Here in Minnesota, our Somali students are eager to see change at that level to serve the community. So sorry.
Well, we're definitely collaborating. There's a couple of subject matter experts within the Somali community in Minnesota. And so NIA Recovery and Alliance Wellness Center are both two organizations serving East African and Somali populations, and their directors are phenomenal people. I mean, phenomenal people. Faria Badul and his name's slipping my mind right now, but she runs the NIA recovery program, and then Yusuf Shafi. Thank you, Theresa. Yusuf Shafi runs Alliance, and I would say anybody in Minnesota knows those two people, but there is an emerging part of the field that the Somali people in particular, but definitely other East African populations living in Minnesota are really growing the recovery and treatment community in the greater Minnesota area.
Thank you. Any thoughts on POC being treated in or by white clinicians in a predominantly white agency based on resources not being readily available in Black and Brown communities, especially when most agencies function on insurance, i.e. managed care?
So they are like a minority within a minority. Not only are they African-American, but they also are receiving treatment in the center where they don't see many people, staff or clients say that look like them.
Well, the article that I posted about Black therapy for, therapy for Black women starts to address some of that. But I also think that this is an opportunity for us to expand the way we think about peer support, and use our virtual tools and skills, resources for people, and just recognizing that there are so many other ways in which you can get support. And we think about our connections to recovery, that it's not limited to the geography that we're in at this time. So telehealth is quite amazing. And there's so many really amazing groups that are popping up. At least I know it's not the same thing, but in Atlanta, we have a group of barbers who are, Black barbers who are helping to bring recovery resources to the community, and just all kinds of other ways that we can be creative. So I would just, definitely recognize that with resources, if we redefine resources as not just like money, but also the information and relationships. So I think what Dr. Tyus had said earlier about education is really important.
So two things really quickly. One, we asked participants to give the panelists a virtual round of applause for the information, for the expertise that they share. Join me in giving the panelists a round of applause. And what I've learned over the years, it's less about what's taught, it's more about the action that you're taking. And you've been with us for almost 90 minutes. So we invite you to put in chat, what's the one action you're thinking about taking as a result of spending time with us today, listening to the panelists? What's the action? Sometimes when you put it in writing, believe it or not, it's more likely to happen. And as you share with us that action that you're planning to take, I will turn things over to Jen and Alyssa.
Thank you, everyone. The chat is starting to fill up with so much praise to you panelists. So thank you panelists for being here today. Just a reminder to everyone attending, I did put a few notes in the chat. My most important reminder is that this recording will be available on our website. We love to share the stories that the panelists were able to provide, and the feedback is just so wonderful. We also I did post a post-event survey link in the chat. Please click on that and fill that out. We truly appreciate your feedback. If you did not get a chance to click on it, you will also be automatically redirected at the end of once I close the webinar. And then lastly, certificates of attendance will be sent out via email to all who have attended the full session today. And then as always, just take a look on our Great Lakes ATTC website and social media for all of our upcoming events and webinars. There's a lot out there. So thank you again all for being here with us. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, panelists. It was such a pleasure having you all join us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.